Okay, in 1921, in Tafresh Peyalef, the Frierdiker Rebbe fell ill. And Chassidim were actually very worried for the Frierdiker Rebbe's life. And at this time, this is only the first year of the Nesius. At this time, there was a chassid by the name of Yitzchak Golden, who was given the responsibility of nursing the Frierdiker Rebbe. During this time, the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke to him, and he wrote a shema of the things the Frierdiker Rebbe told him. And it's been printed in Sefer HaSichos, Tafresh Pei Aleph, a whole bunch of interesting stories that the Frierdiker Rebbe told him at this time. One of the things the Frierdiker Rebbe told him was a Maisa that happened many years earlier in Tafresh Samach Vav in 1906. That year, Tafresh Samach Vav is a famous year in Lubavitch because of the Hemshech, the Maimorim. However, beyond the Maimorim, or in addition to the Maimorim, there was also a lot of action that happened in Lubavitch that summer. This was the story of when groups of people who lived in Lubavitch, young men who were very anti-religious and definitely anti-Hasidic, and they associated themselves with communists, with socialists, with Bundists, with Zionists, and they got into a major fight with the Hanhala of Yeshiva and Toichet Mimim, and basically they wanted to have a daya on how things should operate.
Is it Bachrim or older?
No, young men, single men. They wanted certain people who they didn't like. They wanted to be thrown out of the yeshiva, etc., etc. And there was a lot of tension. Shots were fired. It was a very difficult situation, a difficult time for the Rebbe of Shabbat and the Frierdiker Rebbe. At this time, the Frierdiker Rebbe had to leave because it was Pasha dangerous, and he went to Varsha together with the Rebbetzin of Chamadina. He went to Varsha to be far away from the scene. They literally wanted to attack him. They wanted to hurt him. He reported then to Yitzchak Golden that he was coming out of the mikveh and he was attacked by a young man. He says his name, who it was. Pasha attacked him and tried to hurt him, and the Frierdiker Rebbe defended himself. So it was at this time that the Frierdiker Rebbe also told Golden that at this time he started carrying a gun with him. And he says over there a little maisa, it's in Sefer HaSichos Tafresh Pei Aleph, page 21. He writes that they got a message in Lubavitch that the words that he said or that are written is that the shkatzim are waiting for him in the train station in Orsha, and they want to harm him there. And he was in Rogachev at the time, dealing with issue with regard to Koilo Chabad. Another big issue in Lubavitch at that time was money of Koilo Chabad. Who should it go to and how? Who should be running it? This was another major issue at the time, in that year, Tafrei Samach Vav Samach Zayin. And he writes, and the way the Lashon of the Sikh is, of Eisai's man, Hayali Tamid Iti revolver. I always had a gun with me. Okay, and he says that he prepared the gun in his pocket when he came to the train station in Arsha. And B'Poyol, there was a younger man with him named Shmuel Katzman, who went out and met the people, and he threatened them, and they all ran away. But it's very interesting, the Frierdiker Rebbe was carrying a revolver, a gun, because of threats that were made to his life by fellow Jews. You could say by Lubavitchers, because they lived in Lubavitch. By Lubavitchers at this time. Real Lubavitchers. And why am I saying this story? Because I was thinking, what would New York State say about the Frierdiker Rebbe in terms of whether the New York law, according to this New York law, is he allowed to carry this gun? Why am I referring to a New York law? Because just a few days ago, the Supreme Court overturned the New York law. This is a law that existed in 6 different states in the United States, New York being one of them, New Jersey is another. What's the law? The law basically goes like this. You want to get a permit to have a gun at home, no problem, we'll give you a permit to have a gun at home. But you want to carry a gun on the streets, that we're not going to allow you to do. If you want to go take it for hunting, then that's okay. If you want to go take it to a shooting range, that's okay. But to carry on you in a regular way for self-defense when you're going out and about in New York State, that we're not going to allow you to do. Unless there's one exception. What's the exception? You sit down with an officer and you explain to him why you have a special need. Now, what does it mean, a special need? If you tell the officer you have a special need because you live in a dangerous neighborhood and you come home late at night and you're afraid, that's not called a special need. Everyone lives in a dangerous neighborhood. You have a whole bunch of neighbors that also live there. That's not enough. and the officer could deny you and say, no, you still do not have a right to carry a gun with you on the street. You had to show that you had an extra special threat that's against you as an individual. So, Mashal, maybe if the Frierdiker Rebbe would come in to say, well, there was an attack in Lubavitch, and I was attacked outside the mikveh by these people, and we have information that they're after me. So then maybe they would say, okay, when you're walking out on the street, you have the ability to carry a gun with you, but maybe not. Lavavka, they would assess. It's up to them to make this determination. So a few individuals from New York sued, and it reached the highest court of the land, and the Supreme Court just ruled that this is unconstitutional. What does it mean unconstitutional? It means it goes against the Second Amendment of the Constitution. The Second Amendment of the Constitution is one of the most disputed parts of the American Constitution, where it talks about the right to bear arms, and there's been a long-standing debate of what does this mean. So going back to the year 2006, there was a very famous Supreme Court case that got into the question of is there b'chlal an individual right to have a gun b'chlal at home? Why? Because Washington, D.C. denied people to have guns b'chlal, even at home. So what was the argument? The argument was the Second Amendment, when it says the right to bear arms, it means a police, it means a militia. That's what it means. It doesn't mean individuals. There's no individual right. And there's a major school of thought in the United States that wants to say that that's the right way to interpret the Second Amendment. So the Supreme Court in 2006, in a case called District of Columbia v. Heller, said that that's not right. At least the majority, the 5 conservative justices said that that's not right. That every person has an individual right to keep and bear arms, but it doesn't mean that their government can regulate. You can regulate as long as the individual right is there. And so since then, that's been the norm. There's an individual right, but there's been regulation, including this regulation in New York that said that you cannot have a gun outside your home, you cannot bring it with you, unless you can prove that you have an individual and unique need to do so. And just last week, the court said that no, that is not okay. That's not okay, because the right to bear arms means that you have the right to carry it with you as well. You don't have to prove something special. And the court basically said that in order for a government to come and start making rules, there needs to be a history in where this is justified. This type of rule is justified, and therefore this introduces a change for New York, for New Jersey, and for other states like this. So it's really a good opportunity to ask ourselves, what does Halachah have to share on the subject of weapons in general, on guns, and gun control? So that's what we're going to be looking at. So we're going to begin with the Mishnah in Shabbos. The Mishnah in Shabbos, the very famous Mishnah, says as follows: Lo yetze ha'ish lo b'sayef v'lo b'keshes. A person should not go out on Shabbos with a sword, b'keshes with a bow, v'lo b'tris is a shield, v'lo ba'ala, the Gemara discusses what that is, v'lo b'roimach, and a person should not go out with a spear. So these are individual weapons. A person should not go out with these on Shabbos, even if he's not carrying it in his hand. Even if he's wearing it. Remember, a sword, you're wearing it on your belt. Some of the bow, you're wearing it over your shoulder. It doesn't matter. You're not allowed to go out on Shabbos with this. V'im yatsa, if you did, chayav chatas. So then, like all of anyone who violates any of the 39 malachas, there's a chiyuv of chatas for the person who does this aveh. This is the Tanna Kamma. Rabbi Eliezer Omer comes along, Rabbi Eliezer, and says, no, tachshitin ein loy. It's an ornament. It's like an earring. It's like a ring. And just like the din is that a person is allowed to wear an ornament on Shabbos, even though it's not necessary for the weather, you're not protecting yourself for the weather with an ornament. It's not a lavush, you're not wearing it for tzniistika purposes. Nonetheless, we say tachshitin is permitted to wear on Shabbos. Guess what? I think that when a man walks out and he has a bow over his shoulder, and he has a sword on his belt, I think that this counts as a tachshit. So it counts as a tachshit, and therefore it's going to be mutter to do it. Does it also mean, what about a spear where you hold in your hand? Is Rabbi Eliezer saying that even a spear holding in your hand, that you're not even wearing it, that also holding it you're allowed to do on Shabbos, because holding it is a tachshit? So there's a debate about that. That's a discussion. Does he include holding it in the hand or not? We're not going to get into that. The Chachamim, so now the Chachamim who represent the Tanna Kamma. Remember, the Tanna Kamma doesn't have a name. The reason it doesn't have a name is because everyone says that. So that's the Chachamim. So now the Chachamim are going to defend the Tanna Kamma. And they're going to say, no, it does not count as a tachshit. Einon ela legnai. It doesn't work as a tachshit. Why? Because what's the gather of a tachshit? Gather of a tachshit is, it makes you beautiful. It enhances your appearance. However, this only disparages. It's disgraceful, brings disgrace to a person. Why? Why does the weapons bring disgrace to a person? Shenemar, because we have two psukim in the Navi, one in Yeshaya, one in Micha, that says as follows. And they will take their swords and turn them into plows. They're going to take their spears and turn it into tools to prune, mazmeirois, and lo yisa goy cherev, and one nation won't lift sword against another nation. V'lo yumudu Muhammad, there will be no more training for war. So this is the time of Mashiach. There's going to be a time of Mashiach when there's not going to be any more war, and therefore there's not going to be any more weapons. Kamuvin, there's not going to be more crime. It all goes in the same thing. And so therefore there isn't going to be weapons. And as a result, that turns it into a gnai. What does it mean? Why does that turn it into a gnai? Just knowing that something isn't going to exist one day means that it's a gnai. Because something is not going to exist tomorrow, it's a gnai. So what's happening here is, what we see here is that Judaism has a certain vision for what the world is supposed to look like. And that's an ideal world that we aspire to. And that world is a world in which there are no weapons. So if that's what your hope is, and that's what your vision is, until then you say the world's incomplete, then yes, so for you to go around with that is not an ornament. Maybe it's necessary, maybe it's necessary, but it doesn't turn it into an ornament. An ornament means, a tachshit means, a gather of a tachshit to allow you to go out on Shabbos means that it brings only beauty to you. Guess what? This brings mixed feelings. That's what it brings. When we look at it with mixed feelings, we say it's maybe necessary, but it's something that's evil. It's something that we don't want to see. It's something that we don't want to have, and we wait for the day when we are not going to need to have that. Now, what would Rabbi Eliezer say to this? 1 second. What would Rabbi Eliezer say to this? Rabbi Eliezer agrees. L'chayra, he has to agree with the nevuah. So yes, he agrees with he has to agree with the nevuah. The Gemara says two options. One option is that Rabbi Eliezer says, fine, one day you're not going to need it. But guess what? I could still say that today, when you do need it, it is an ornament. Why not abgefragt? Yeah, ideally we don't want to live in a world where there's weapons, but today, when it's necessary, it is an ornament. Okay, fine. So that's an interesting machlokes. The Gemara offers another possibility, what Rabbi Eliezer holds. And this is an amazing thing. That Rabbi Eliezer maybe holds like the Shitta that says that there isn't going to be radical change when Moshiach comes. The only difference is that Jews are going to become truly independent. That's it, as far as our Shitta. Shmuel says, "Ein bein olam hazeh Moshe Mashiach, ela shibud malchus bovad." The only difference is going to be shibud malchus, which means Jews are going to have independence, which means you could still have war. The nevuah seems to say that there isn't going to be a war. Okay, so you have to interpret it as a metaphor, and I don't know exactly how. So maybe Rabbi Eliezer would hold this way. These are the two options that the Gemara gives in this regard. What does this give us? What does this give us? What this gives us is an important teaching that's negea today. Does it tell us anything about regulation? It tells us of guns. It doesn't tell us anything. And so, as I have seen some people who want to justify their positions, that first they have their position, then they go bring a text. They're like, Judaism is pro-controlling, limiting weapons because of this Mishnah. Sorry, you don't have that in this Mishnah. This Mishnah isn't limiting weapons. In fact, the default of this Mishnah, the assumption of this Mishnah is that people are having weapons and they're going out on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Shaila, you're allowed to go out on Shabbos. So that's not a conversation. To turn this into a conversation about whether we should or not be regulating guns, that's in my view, this is not correct. But there is something very important that we gain from here. That is, the reality is that there is a certain culture in this country that very much, in some places and sometimes in places, that celebrates weapons. This is expressed by a concept of gun shows that are more than just about buying and selling. They're more about it becoming an event. The concept of gun collections, where this is not about security anymore, but it's about the kach and the celebration of this idea. And there are other expressions of it, maybe you could say in video games or other areas, and we kind of put this area, the idea of violence and weaponry, front and center in in our culture. And what we see here is that we're learning nishtazai, that this is l'chayra, not the Jewish perspective. Halacha views it perhaps as something that's necessary. However, it's a necessary evil, and the idea that we're going to celebrate it, the idea that we're going to promote this, the idea that we're going to create a culture around it, that seems to be an example of where, and yes, there are Jews who do this, but it does seem to be an example of where they've adopted values that are a shtickle foreign to Yiddishkeit. Now, I like to always connect, if possible, to the Parshas HaShavua. So we have a reference in this week's Parsha that connects to this. How is that? Because this week's Parsha, in Parshas Koirach, we have the pasuk that says as follows: Vayerdu heim. This is Koirach going down. V'chol asher lahem chayim shoyla. They went underground, alive. V'atachas aleim haaretz. The earth covered them over. Vayoivdu mitoich hakol. And they were lost from amongst the people. Okay, you notice that the Baal HaTurim, many of the shtiklach of the Baal HaTurim begin with the concept where he's referencing the Mesorah. What is this reference to the Mesorah? Today, when we open our Chumash, we don't really see the Mesorah anymore. But it used to be that in the early editions of the Mekros Gedolos Chumashim that were printed in the first century of printing, and earlier in the Kisvei Yad, when people had handwritten manuscripts of a Tanakh, just like to us, we always know that together with the Chumash you have Rashi, together with the Chumash you have Onkelos, then also Davar HaPasha, together with the Chumash you always had the Mesorah. What's the Mesorah mean? The Mesorah is where there were a tradition that the scribes had, where they would cross-reference words. For example, our word here, Vayoivdu. How many times in Tanakh do you have the word spelled exactly the same way, with the exact same nikud? Not Vayoivedu, but not Vayoivdu, but Vayoivdu. How many times in Tanakh do you have that word? So the scribes, the Sofrim, they wanted to keep track of this. Why? Because then you have a better tradition in terms of the right ways of spelling. There's ways to remember, there's more accountability. And so they would write, next to the word Vayoivdu, they would write the other place in Tanakh where you had the exact same spelling of that word. And there you know, oh, okay, so these are the only two times it's spelled this way, which means other times it has a different nikud or it has a different spelling. And this was one of the tools that was used to keep track of the proper spelling and nikud of different words. Fine. So this is how it started.
There was a concordance.
Yeah, it's similar to concordance but different. So this was going on for hundreds of years. Okay, then what happened was that at a certain point, in the times of the Rishonim, they started darshaning, learning pshat in them. Meaning, it's like the Rebbe would often say, everything in Torah is b'diuk. So don't tell me that the Vayoivdu here, and the one other time is Vayoivdu was just so you remember how to spell and how to pronounce. No, it has to be that there's a connection between this Vayoivdu and that Vayoivdu. So already in the times of the Rishonim, Maram Rothenburg did this, and the Baal HaTurim did this, where they started giving drashas and interpretations that are based on this. Okay, everyone knew what it meant because you had the Mesorah and then you just had the Baal HaTurim there. But then the printers took out the Mesorah. So because they took out the Mesorah, so when sometimes we look at a Baal HaTurim, we don't really understand exactly what he's referring to. So the Baal HaTurim says on the Vayoivdu, look what he writes.
For every word, or only specific, like
not every word. Yeah, not every word. So for example, the word Vayedaber, they wouldn't put a thing there. So only specific words, and different manuscripts had different things in terms of what was being referenced. It wasn't like one standard Mesorah that was across the board the same in each one.
So you're saying when Baal HaTurim quotes a word, he would always add the Mesorah there?
So but when he's saying Beis b'Mesorah, what he's saying is that if you look in the margin of his Chumash, there would be one other reference to the word Vayoivdu over there. That's what it means, Beis b'Mesorah. In the Mesorah, there's one other reference to a Vayoivdu in Tanakh. And then he would go and darshan the connection between the two, which he does here. What's the other one? The other one is in Shmuel Beis, Parak Aleph, Pasuk Chav Zayin. This is where Yonasan and Shaul have fallen in battle to the Plishtim, and David composes a kina for them, and amongst the words that is there, Vayoivdu klei milchama, the weapons have been lost. And the Mefarshim say that this is a reference to Shaul and Yonasan. They epitomize klei milchama, and so this is just a poetic way that David is referring to their laws, Vayoivdu klei milchama. So that's the only other time in Tanakh that you have Vayoivdu spelled that way and pronounced that way. Okay, what's the drasha here?
So just a quick question. If it had multiple times, either it wouldn't say Mesorah or
Gimel b'Mesaira.
What?
It would say Gimel b'Mesaira. He would write, if it's 3 times, Beis is the second time, yeah. Yeah, Beis is the second time, so it could have other. But but I don't know, it seems that there are many references to Beis b'Mesaira. Usually it's 1-to-1 type of thing. I didn't study the topic close enough to be able to give a full examination. Okay, what does he say? So what's the connection? So he says the connection between Koirach va'yoivdu mitoichakol, Koirach va'yoivdu mitoichakol, David and Shaul va'yoivdu klei mochama. What's the connection? Kivin shenevdu klei mochama. Kivin shenevdu. Once once Koirach and Adasai were lost, were killed. So nevdu klei mochama. So klei mochama have been lost. This is very cryptic. What does he mean? In other words, he's telling you the va'yoivdu over here. Learn from over there, it says Vayodu Klei Mochama. Vayodu Klei Mochama happened over here too. What's going on over here? So there's different interpretation. I saw one interpretation is that Klei Mochama, what he's saying is that Koirach was a big Talmud Chacham. And his allies were also big Talmud Chachamim. And they engaged in Mochamta Shal Torah. They used to get involved in the debates of Torah. Kivin Shenevdu, once they've been destroyed, so Nevdu Klei Mochama, the Klei Mochama, these weapons of Torah have been lost. This follows the tradition that Koirach was a tzaddik, and there was a great lamdan, and that he brought halachic arguments, and all of those arguments were now lost. This is one way of interpreting what the Baal HaTurim is saying. But I saw, in which case doesn't have relevance to what we're talking about here tonight. However, I saw another interpretation that was given where someone said the pshat is like this: Kivin Shenevdu, when people like Koirach are destroyed, when the Rishoyim are destroyed, then that's Mashiach Tzaitin. What happens by Mashiach Tzaitin? Nevdu Klei Mochama, weapons are going to be disappearing. So here we have a reference to this idea of the weapons disappearing when Mashiach comes, together with the Rishoyim disappearing, and Haba Hatalia, you can't have weapons disappear. As long as you have wicked people, we need weapons to defend ourselves. You need to have both. When the wicked people are gone, the weapons could be gone. Now that we have wicked people, we still need to have the weapons. But again, the larger point that we're taking away from this teaching is Einon Ela L'Gnai. This is the shit of the majority. This is the shit of the Chachamim. Irrespective of Rabbi Eliezer, the fact is that the Chachamim said Einon Ela L'Gnai. These are not an ornament. This is not something to celebrate. And there's another famous quote in this regard in the Mishnah in Midos, and Rashi brings us Halat Torah, where it speaks about and explains why there's an isser to cut the mizbeach with metal. And it says that metal is used for weaponry, and that shortens people's lives. The Mizbeach is all about giving people arichas yamim, and therefore this is a collision course. These are two incompatible entities, and we have no right to lay metal onto the Mizbeach. Here again, there's this unwillingness to celebrate the weapon. There's unwillingness. It's like, no, there's kedusha, there's the Beis Hamikdash, there's holiness, and that's good, and that's what we want, and that's what we celebrate. And this. It's maybe something that we need in life, but it doesn't enter our holiest sanctum. It doesn't enter into that conversation. So that's Nakuda number 1. Nakuda number 2 is that very often when people want to have weapons, it's for hunting. And hunting, as we're going to see, is not so compatible with Judaism. So where do we see this? It's a celebrated tshuva from the Noda B'Yehuda. The Noda B'Yehuda lived in the 1700s, and he has a tshuva that was written to someone who, his lashon in the tshuva is, Yiko Hashem benachal arechava. Someone who the Eibusher gave him a huge estate. Yeah, he owns a huge estate. He's a shtickle paretz himself. And he owns wilderness, kfarim, the yarois, and there are many different animals. So his shaila was, Imuter loy leilech ba'atzmoi, lirois, beknei, sreifa, latzutzayir. The Yid wants to know, am I allowed to go hunting? This is the question that he asked in Noda B'Yehuda. So what does Rabbi Yechezkel Landa?
What's the meaning of lirois bekona?
Knei Sreifa is a gun. It's the rabbinic way in the 1700s of saying a gun is to say Knei Sreifa or something similar to that. Knei means a tube. Sreifa is the gunpowder, the fire. Okay. So he says as follows: is there an issue here of Tsar Ba'alei Chayim? So he says there is no issue here of Tsar Ba'alei Chayim. Why is there no issue of Tsar Ba'alei Chayim? Because anything that's being done for a human need doesn't have the din of Tsar Ba'alei Chayim. What's the human need? We'll see in a second what it is. But anything that has a human need, there's no Tsar Ba'alei Chayim. Then he goes on and says another thing. Killing an animal, he argues, is not Tsar Ba'alei Chayim. Tsar Ba'alei Chayim is keeping an animal alive and causing it to suffer. Killing an animal is not Tsar Ba'alei Chayim. Now the truth is, here he's entering an area of machlokes, and the Alter Rebbe disagrees. The Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch talks about Tzar Ba'alei Chayim at least 2 times, and when he talks about Tzar Ba'alei Chayim, it's very clear the Alter Rebbe holds that killing an animal is also tzar, because it's a kosher game. Ma'adach, maiming it is a tzar. Certainly, taking away its life is a tzar as well. Okay, it's a machlokes. It's different shittas. But the Noda B'Yehuda wanted to say that hunting is not forbidden because of Tzar Ba'alei Chayim. Number 1, it has a human need. That everyone agrees with. Number 2, because there is, because you're killing it, and the Tzar Ba'alei Chayim doesn't apply there, and that I'm telling you is a debate. Then he goes on to say, what about Bal Tashchis? There isn't the issue about tashchis here, destroying elements of creation. Why? Because you have enough from the skin. You go to the animal, you take the skin, you sell it, and that also is the human need. You're using it for the human need of the skin. And so therefore, there's no Tzar Ba'alei Chayim because of the skin. There's no Bal Tashchis because of the skin. And pretty much, I think, that everyone, I think, would agree with. I don't think anyone would agree with that. Then, however, he continues in his Shuvah, and he says as follows. He says, V'hinei ad koi dibarnu mitzad hadin. All of this is a matter of law. However, on the entire practice, I'm bewildered by this entire practice. You learn that, look in the Torah, who's a hunter? Nimrod's a hunter. Who's a hunter? Esav's a hunter. This does not have a Jewish flavor. And then he brings from one of the poskim named Reb Yaakov Weil. Reb Yaakov Weil is one of the poskim who lived in the 1400s, who is the first to quote this minhag that when someone, there was this common thing when someone would have come with a new pair of shoes, they would say you should wear it out and get new ones. Tibala v'techadesh. What was the idea? The idea was you should have arichas yamim. So you're going to use this, and you're going to use it in good health, and you're going to need a new one, and you have the money to buy a new one. So it's a nice way of giving a bracha to someone. You should wear these out healthily. That's basically what you were saying. So the Reb Yaakov Weil wrote that it's not appropriate to say that if it's leather. Why? Because it means it's coming from an animal, and if it's coming from an animal, so then it means another animal. You're basically giving a bracha that an animal should die. This is what Reb Yaakov Weil wrote. And so therefore he said you shouldn't say it. So for if it's coming from tzemeach, no, you say it. If it's coming from animals, inappropriate. The Ramah brings this to Shulchan Aruch. And the Ramah isn't so happy with this chumrah. The Ramah says, I don't understand. First of all, you're going to wear those out. You're going to buy another one. Which other one? The one from Tom down the road. No new animals dying as a result. Why are you saying that? So he's not so sure that he likes. And then he says, some animals die spontaneously, and then we go and we take the leather from them. So therefore, he says, I don't think we need to be too makbid in this, but he does say the fact is he looks around. The Ramah living in the 1500s says, I look around. That's what Jews are careful. They say it for shirts, they say it for different garments, but they're very careful not to say it for shoes or things that come from leather because of this sensitivity to animals. Says in Noda B'Yehuda, look what you see over here between these sources. When you look at these sources, we see the sensitivity to animal suffering, and now you're going to go and ride on an animal and go into the woods and you're going to start shooting. It's like pasnish. I don't think this is appropriate for a nice Jewish boy. His lashon is how could you go and kill an animal without any need? To satisfy your boredom. Now, what does he mean? He said a second ago using the skin. I think he would tell you, yeah, you're using the skin, but that's not why you're going hunting. Right? You don't go hunting to use the skin. It happens, so maybe it's enough to tell you that it's not Tzar Ba'alei Chayim. But at the end of the day, if you're going because you mamish need skin, you're like, let's go, we need skin for shoes. So let's go into, fine, Beseder. But that's not what this is about. This is about a pastime. This is about pleasure. And you found a heter by using the skin. He doesn't like it. Then he goes, come back to Halachah, he says one more thing. He says, till now, I spoke what I think is ethical. But now I think there is Isser, which basically almost sounds like he first wanted to do Halachah, and he did Halachah in the beginning. And he told us there is no Tzar Ba'alei Chayim, and he told us there is no issue about Tashchis. So those two things he took care of. And then he went away from Halachah, and he went to Hashkafa, but now he circles back to Halachah and says there is a halachic issue. What is a halachic issue now? Sakanas atzmai. Sakanas atzmai. A person is putting themselves in danger. I'm sure that every year there are hunting accidents, just as there are accidents in many areas in life. Okay? So it's a whole... Huh?
Who's going alone?
That we don't have that information.
Oh,
No, we don't know if he's
it's
going
own
alone or
place.
not.
It's his own mistake.
What's the sakana? The sakana is weapons could malfunction, animals could attack. Who knows what could happen? So sakana can. So there's a prohibition to put yourself into a sakana. So he says, Mele, if it was for your parnasa, so then it's going to be mutter. But if it's not for your parnasa, then this is not allowed. And then he brings Esav's famous words. Esav says in Parshas Teldis, Hine anoichi hoilech lamos, v'lama zeh li b'chayra. This is what Esav says. What did Esav mean when he said, I'm going to die? Why do I need the b'chayra? What did he mean? So the Nida Yehuda brings from the Ramban. The Ramban says, Esav said like this, I'm a hunter. We have very, very short life expectancy because it's such a dangerous malacha. And I know all the people before me who did this, they died young. I'm also going to die young. So what's the benefit of having the b'chayra and the covet and the rights that come with it? I'm probably going to pass away before my father passes away. I'm not even going to be able to inherit a double portion. So this is what he meant. So bring this as a raya that is dangerous, and therefore he says that it's not allowed. So the bottom line is there are 4 factors. Bal Tashchis doesn't think it's an issue using the skin. Tzar Balachayim, also he doesn't think it's an issue if you're using the skin. Yiddish Tam, this doesn't have. This is the malacha of Esav and Nimrod. And then he says a halachic issue of this is a sakana, and so therefore he is against it. So why is this relevant? It's relevant because, again, within the society that we live, guns play a significant role in this activity. And this is an activity that bepashtus is borderline usher, if not, and somewhat, and to a degree, contrary to Jewish values. The Rebbe spoke about, we'll do questions soon. The Rebbe spoke about hunting one time, as far as I know. It was a sikha about Miu Yehudi. I don't know how exactly the sikha Miu Yehudi transitioned into hunting, but because it was Miu Yehudi, the Rebbe lechatchila was speaking in a very animated tone, and so when the Rebbe is speaking about hunting, the Rebbe is speaking in a very, very animated tone. It's Tu B'Shvat Tavshan Lamed Beis. You can listen to the audio, and it's really interesting to hear what the Rebbe says. So I put it here on the sheet, and here's some of the points that the Rebbe says when he's talking about hunting. First, he says, "Zeo davar she'en le'makom ba'anushis." This is not a normal human activity. Hayitachin she'ata lekeach ba'al chayim mesar osei. Who gives you the right to take an animal and cause it pain? Oisa ba'amum, maiming it, oy hoyre goisa, killing it, leloy tayalas bedavar, without any purpose. Loy beglal shareitz alechos, sorry, you don't want to eat. Number 7. Hatayalas hayechidehi, the only reason you're doing this, kivin shekvar asa hakel, because you did everything. Ve'in lo yoyser ma'alases, you have nothing else to do. Lechein oisa achuzas mereu, you therefore gather your friends. Reikim upoichas in kamosai, low lives. V'yoysim besada b'yar v'yoyim. You go out to the field and to the forest to shoot. V'afal became, and nonetheless, despite how despicable this is, nikpa seder hachevra, our societal expectation is, shaloi oimrim lo she'ena begeder anushi. We're not allowed to tell such a person that this is non-human behavior. V'lo yizul b'vachein and nechshav lepesha. Not only it's not a crime, afilu lo pesha katan, not even a misdemeanor. Ala adarabba oimrim uwa hutzat. You're a great hunter. That's what we tell such people. Continues the Rebbe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu bara oischaim seichel. God created you with seichel. Kadesha tanas also seichel livnois as well, to build, to construct, to make better. You're taking God's gift, how to destroy and how to damage. According to the Torah, it's forbidden to harm living beings, even the smallest living being. This is interesting because there is a shitta about Tzar Balachayim that it only applies to bigger animals, and it doesn't apply to like mosquitoes and the like. Here the Rebbe seems to be implying otherwise. Ela in Cain, midubar oides davar amazik. Okay, if it hurts you, then you're allowed to. For pleasure, we're not allowed to hurt another animal. Not only an animal, even vegetation. And here he says, like the famous story of the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab, where they were taking a walk, and the Frierdiker Rebbe ripped a plant out of the ground, and the Rebbe Rashab reprimanded him, saying, "This has a function, this has a purpose. What you do needs to be calculated, and you can't just do things in a random way and depriving that plant from its right to life." Okay, so that's in terms of Yiddishkeit and hunting. Putting those two things aside, put aside the culture and celebration of weapons, which is not Jewish. and put aside the issue of hunting, we have something else. What is the something else? That is decidedly a Jewish value, self-defense. Self-defense is a decidedly Jewish value. We spoke before about the Frierdiker Rebbe who was going around with a gun. Why? He needed to. He needed to. And it could be, Al Pi Torah, he had to. And so that's something that's necessary. Oh, so here we come to the question of, we're in this zone, so this is appropriate Al Pi Torah. On the other hand, there's also concerns. What are the concerns? When there are guns around, bad things could happen. Accidents can happen. Bad people can get a hold of the guns. There are people who unfortunately take their life with these weapons. So how are we supposed to balance? How do we balance in Yiddishkeit these two competing values? On the one hand, self-defense is an important thing. On the other hand, there are some concerns. How do we balance it? In America, the discussion revolves around the Second Amendment. What does this pshat in the Second Amendment? Torah, we don't have the Second Amendment. Torah, we have other dinim. So let's look at the other dinim to see how they could perhaps help us in this regard. There are three sugyas that we're going to look at. There are three sugyas that we're going to look at that I think get most of the discussion revolves around these three sugyas. So let's begin with sugya number 1, Gemara Baba Kama. It's going to be a conversation about dogs. Dr. Gemara and Baba Kama as follows. Lo yigadel adam as hakelav. A person shouldn't raise, which means you shouldn't own, you shouldn't have a dog. We're talking here, the Mefarshim tell us not just any dog, we're talking about a kelav ra. What's a kelav ra? A kelav ra does one or two things. Either it attacks, or at the very least, it barks. And it gives such a scary bark, as we'll see in a second, the Rashi is going to say, that it can cause damage. We'll see in a second. So, lo yigadel adam es hakelav, a person should not have such a dog, ella in kain kosher b'shalshalas, unless it's tied, if it's on a leash. If it's tied with a shalshalas, with a chain, so then we could say that it is safe, and then that's okay. So this is al derech saying, you can have a certain weapon. However, it needs to have a lock. It needs to be locked away. It needs to have some sort of security around it. That's what this is saying. Aval continues the Gemara and says, if a person lives in a city that's next to the frontier, that's next to the border, and throughout history, anytime you live next to the frontier, that's where it's a shtickle no man's land. That's where it's a shtickle hefkeros. That's where crime goes up. People come from other areas, and they come and they're stealing and they're taking. You're not living in a proper city. So here, there's a higher incident crime. Okay. Today, it's like the inner cities have more crime. The outlying areas have less. Okay. Every time and place is different. So,
like the border.
The border, yeah, the frontier, yeah. So then, what's the din? The din is koishrei b'yom, by day you have to keep it. You have to keep it tied. Umatira b'layla, at night you're allowed to let it go. And now it's running around freely on your farm, protecting. What's happening over here? How come b'layla it's mutter to change it, and now it's allowed to go free? It's two reasons. The Marshal is going to tell us in a moment. It's two reasons. Number one, the risk is much higher, meaning thefts go up at night, so the need is higher. That's not the only reason. There's another reason. The potential harm to other people is considerably lower. Why? Because regular, innocent, normal people in those days aren't walking around at night. So the potential harm to an innocent person is very low. On the other hand, the potential harm to yourself, damage to yourself, the threat to yourself goes up considerably, and so therefore the din changes. Okay, fine. Rashi, Baba Kama, what's the problem with the dog? Because it bites, but it also because it barks, and a woman will miscarry out of the anxiety of experiencing this dog. Okay. Now we come to the 16th century, and we find that the poskim, three major poskim of the 16th century, are going to be grappling with the fact that they have a reality, there's this din, and the reality that they're experiencing isn't matching up with the din. So number one, the Shiltei HaGebarim lived in Italy. His name was Rabbi Yeshua Boyaz. In the Gemara, he's the mechaber of the Ein Mishpat and the Ner Mitzvah, that you have those marginal notes at the side of the Gemara. But he also wrote comments to the Mordechai, the Rif. And he writes as follows, to Mihasi, I have a shaila. Who gives us the right to allow dogs to run free? And it seems to me, the Shema Dafke Be'ir Hasmucha Lisfar.
The Gemara was saying that was Halachah?
The Gemara was saying Halachah, yeah. Maybe when the Gemara was talking about, what was it talking about? It was talking about a city that's taken next to the frontier, and there Bayoim during the day, she'enon yireim, when there is no fear, kaishroi, so then you need to tie it up because there isn't any real fear by day. Va'anan she'dorim beinehem, but us today we live amongst them meaning the non-Jews. So our society is worse than a frontier. Is worse than a frontier. In other words, you think from the Gemara, frontier is the worst type of society possible. And there, by day, the dog still has to be tied. Zakter, no. By us, it's worse. Even during the day, we can let the dog loose. Because our crime levels in our Italian cities that we're living in the 16th century is equal to what you experience in Talmudic times at the frontier. And so therefore, just like there, you let it run loose. Therefore, by us, also you let it run loose. Now notice here, there's a problem. He only gave a half of an explanation. He gave an explanation that the crime is higher, equal to what it was in the frontier towns in Talmudic times at night. Fine. But what about the other factor that I've said before? That there are more innocent people walking around, right? So he hasn't accounted for that. And we'll see that the Marshal is not happy with that. And the Marshal is the next text. Zek the Marshal, he lived in the same generation, the Marshal. Poland, very far away. In Poland, the Marshal lived, Reb Shlomo Luria, also in the mid-1500s. I don't like this heter. Chada, because number one, we see our eyes see, we see for ourselves. It's not true. You don't need more protection by day over than what was necessary in Talmudic times. Despite the fact that we live with non-Jews. Don't tell me that it's more dangerous than the Talmudic frontier. Nisht. Just like there, you had to tie it by day. Same thing. And then in the next paragraph, he goes on to say the other point that I mentioned before. And even if you wanted to say crime rates are higher, at the end of the day, at night, there are people around. At night, there are no people around. But during the day, even if the crime rates are higher, but with innocent people, this is not okay. This is not Beseder. He doesn't like it. What's happening over here? This is an early example of a gun control debate. Just not with guns, but with dogs. What's going on over here? Our time is different. Our place is different. Yes, it is different. No, it's not different. It should justify that we should allow the dog. We should let the dog run free. No, you shouldn't run because it's going to hurt innocent people. It's a dog control debate rather than a gun control debate. It's a dog control debate that's happening between these positions. And what often happens in that situation? Comes the moderate. What does a moderate do? What does a moderate do? Compromise. So who's the moderate that offered a compromise? The Ramah. What did the Ramah? The Ramah in Shulchan Aruch says. The Ramah in Shulchan Aruch basically, and this becomes clear when you read the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe tells us this is what the Ramah means. The Ramah says, depends what type of dog. If it's a biting dog, we're not going to be makabel the heter from the Shultei Agiborim. But if it's just a barking dog, then we will be makabel the heter of the Shultei Agiborim. So this is what the Ramah says. The Alter Rebbe himself says that he disagrees with this, that he prefers the Marshal's approach. Okay, so the bottom line is you have three major stars. Marshal's approach is you have to follow Din the Talmud. At night, you can let it loose. During the day, it has to be tied up. That's the Marshal's approach. So we have three major poskim in the 16th century, Shultei Agiborim, the Marshal, and the Ramah, all debating the dog control debate that is going on at the time. Again, Marshal says, you follow the Talmudic rule, you're allowed to have a scary dog, a bad dog, a vicious dog you're allowed to have. Day, it needs to be tied up. At night, you can let it run loose. This is even though maybe there's a little bit of latitude here because you're not mamish on the frontier, but still it looks like he's going to be comfortable with that. On the other extreme, you have the Shultei Agiborim, who says that you pretty much can have the vicious dog running around by day as well, no problem. You have the Ramah saying it depends on the level of viciousness. This is like, when people say, well, it depends on what type of gun, this type of gun, or that type of gun. So what you see over here is that, what's the bigger idea that we see over here? Comes to self-defense, I could say, I want to defend myself and my property. I could do whatever I want. I don't care what happens to other people. I could do whatever I want. It's my right. Okay? Here we see, that's not true. Torah does not allow for that. It's balancing. What exactly that balancing is going to look like, I'm not going to walk away and say that I know how to paskin about gun control from this. I think that would be a little foolish to do. But what we do see here is let's not focus on the details. Bigger picture. The bigger picture value that emerges from here is I don't have a right to say, well, I need to protect my home, I need to protect my estate, I need to protect my family, I need to protect my property, and so therefore, this is what I'm going to do. There may be potential damage to society, I don't care. No. There's a balancing act that has to happen because we do need to worry about society. We do to make sure that our own security measures that we're introducing into our lives, we need to make sure that they don't end up hurting somebody else. Now, there is a very important difference between a gun and a dog. What's the difference between a gun and a dog? A dog, you can't control it. If you have a dog, it does what it does, right? A gun on its own is never going to hurt anyone. You need to have a human agent who's going to come and is going to set it off. And that makes dogs actually...
Slogan, guns don't kill, people kill.
Oh, and that makes a dog more chamor in a sense, more chamor. In other words, we would be more careful about dogs than we would need to be about guns. And that is true, but I don't think it strips the value. The essential value of you don't have, just because you're protecting yourself, it doesn't mean you have a right to do anything. There is a balancing that you need to do between protecting your own, but also not hurting others. Okay, but at the end of the day, yes, it is true that if you want to study this subject, you can't really stop with dogs. You need to look in Talmudic precedent to see what about weapons itself. Has there been any case where there was takanis, laws, limiting the sale, dissemination of weapons? Okay, so that's going to be more on point for what we need. The answer is that there isn't much. There isn't much. And what's fascinating about this is that Jewish communities throughout history had so much regulation. Almost every area of life was regulated. There's takanis about so many different things. There aren't many takanis bichlal about limiting weapons, and the ownership of weapons and the sale of weapons. We don't really find much about it, which is really, really interesting. But there, yeah, of course you're able to. There's no doubt that Dinah de Gemara, the Manhige Ha'ir, the leaders of the community, and the Chacham of the Bezdin have the right to make laws in almost all areas that are Beinadon Lachavei, right? And I don't think anyone doubts that they would have the right to make laws about this. But as far as we know, we don't have anything except for two things. There are two things that we have that we need to pay attention to. Number one is the issue by Ir Miklat. We know the Ir Miklat, someone kills B'shoigig, they have to go and they have to run to an Ir Miklat. Ir Miklat cannot be a city of most people who are Hayrig B'shkaga. Most people have to be regular people. You can have a minority of people who live there who are Hayrig B'shkaga. Fine. At the end of the day, here you have a city where many people have a bullseye on their back. Why? Because there's a Goyal Adam who was chasing him, at least potentially, who wanted to take this person's life because he killed his relative. So you have what we would say in modern terminology, these are higher threats. These are areas, zones, and where there's a potential for higher crime. Okay, how the Chachamim going to react to that? The fact that we have this. So it turns out that there's a machlokes in the Gemara. Makis Daf Yuram Aleph. Let's jump to number 16 due to time. Says the Gemara in Makis, Ve'moichrim behem loy klei zayin. You have the Tana Rabbi Nechemia say that in an Ir Miklat, you're not allowed to sell weaponry. And you're not allowed to sell traps. Usually traps are used for catching animals. This is what Rabbi Nechemia said. Wow, this is gun control. You're not allowed to sell it in the city. However, that's only a Das Yachid. That's Rabbi Nechemia. And the Chachamim say it's fine, you could. So now, jump to Rashi. Rashi in text 17. Shalo yikne goyal hadam sham zayin v'yarek. Why did Rabbi Nechemia want that we shouldn't sell weapons in the Ir Miklat? I don't want the goyal adam to come into the city, buy a chashuva weapon, and go take the life of the goyal of the Reitzeach, of the person who killed Bishkaga, who's living in the Ir Miklat. Now Rashi has to address the question. Okay, so you're not going to sell it there. He's just going to bring it from his house. Zok Rashi, she'im yovi klei zayim im koimo yagishu boy. If he's going to bring a weapon from home, they, doesn't say who this pronoun they is, but they are going to realize. They are going to realize. What's Rashi basically telling us? Rashi's telling us something amazing. There's a border control. Around the Ir Miklat is a border control. And when a person walked up, they're asking questions, and they figured out, there's a Goyal Adam. They're checking his bags. If they have a chashash that he's a Goyal Adam, and they see in his bag a knife, they're going to take it away from him. They're not going to let him in. That's gun control. That's gun control. Okay? Now it is true that the Chachamim said that they're matir. We have to understand what that is. But first let's follow Rab Nechemia. Rab Nechemia says you don't sell it in the city, and you're not allowed to bring it into the city. This is gun control according to Rab Nechemia. Why? Because it's a higher potential for crime in this area. Now we have to understand, so what's the Chachamim? What's the Chachamim? So it's fascinating that we have a debate. Because gun control is the epitome of a debate in our society. And in the din, the clearest din in Shas, that sounds like gun control, you also have a machlokes. What's the Chachamim svara? It's not clear. And it doesn't get a lot of attention by the Mefarshim. No, it doesn't have a lot of conversation. Obviously, your miklat hasn't been practiced in so long, so it's not a surprise that it doesn't have so much conversation. But there's a few different explanations. One explanation goes as follows. This one is given by Rabbi Yitzchak Chayes in his commentary to Gemara Makkas. He says, Chachamim say he's going to buy a weapon in the Ir Miklat and he's going to kill the guy. Everyone's going to know. He assumes that the murder is going to be discovered. Everyone's going to know, and he's going to be punished. And he's scared of the punishment, so he's not going to do it. So what are you worried about? There's nothing to worry about. So this is how he just doesn't feel that there's a need. He doesn't feel that there's a need. Okay, so now I come to Rabbi Yitzchak Chayes and I say, okay, but what if the Chachamim felt that it's not automatic the guy's going to get caught? Because that's our reality. We live in a society where many, many people who commit murders aren't caught, right? So all of a sudden, he would say, whoa, in that case, Chachamim maybe agree to Rab Nechemia. According to Rabbi Yitzchak Chayes, the Chachamim only disagree because we're so confident in the police investigation, so much so that the guy lechatchila is not going to show up to kill. Okay. Another interpretation, maybe, I didn't see this in any svarim, but maybe, Chachamim say, what do you mean? What's the problem? The Goyal Adam is going to come and buy a weapon? And what do you think the person, the victim, the potential victim, the Reiteach B'Shkaga, what do you think he's going to do? He's going to come to the Ir Miklat and he needs to buy a weapon. And in fact, if you don't sell weapons there, and he ran to the Ir Miklat and he came quickly and he didn't bring his knife with him, so how does he protect himself? Of course you need to sell it there. In other words, I don't care, let the Goyal Adam buy, let him buy and let them duke it out, right? That's something that's also discussed today, right? When people discuss gun control, it's like, well, the criminals are going to get the weapons anyway, so you might as well have a legal way for the victims or the potential victims to get here the person who had to run away to the Ir Miklat. So that may be a possibility. Or maybe if there's taka a border control, maybe the Chachamim agree that there's a border control. And if they see, just like they're checking bags, if they see the Goyal Adam, then they watch him, they don't let him in, or whatever it is. So it's we don't really know. We don't really know, because the Halachah obviously is going to be like the Chachamim. But we don't really know what exactly was on the Chachamim's mind. It is interesting that there is a machlokes and that there is a debate about it, but it's hard to really draw and say the implication from this is, you can't really do that because we don't know what the svara of the Chachamim is. We don't really know what their thinking is. And because we don't really know what their thinking is, so therefore it's hard to say anything definitive when it comes to this particular day.
The Rishonim don't discuss it because it's not a lot of...
The Rishonim don't discuss this. Also, there's one other issue in that there's another girsa, the Gemara, where it's not even talking about weapons here. And some of the Rishonim had that girsa. And so that's another reason why this doesn't get a decent amount of coverage. Okay.
It could also be that simple. There's no such thing as gun control according to Torah, according to most people.
Yeah,
Meaning, there's just no issue with having weapons, period.
Could be like, just like we don't care type of attitude.
There's no far from a comment.
No, but I think of it. If Rab Nechemia comes and says, look, I'm worried for this guy's life, I don't think Chachamim could say we don't care. It doesn't sound, especially in light of what we saw earlier with the dogs. The response can't be we don't care. The response has to be what you're doing is not effective. The response has to be what you care about, we're accomplishing in a better way. And that's some of the points that I was talking about. What you care about, you want to protect his life, give him the ability to buy a gun. You want to protect his life, we'll catch him at the border. I think those are ways of understanding what the Chachamim are. I think the Chachamim have to say something. I don't think they could just say, I don't care. They have to care. They just have to come up with a solution that works, that makes sense.
Well, if you're coming from the rights perspective, that you could say, well, what do you mean? The Chachamim are saying that this is not a good enough reason to take away the rights for everyone to be able to buy.
And that was one of the things that I said. One of the things I said is that let the Goyal Adam and the local residents have the ability to buy weapons. Good people should buy weapons. Okay, one more sugya in Gemara that's relevant to this discussion. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Daf Tesvav, says as follows: Ein moichrin lahem lo zayin v'lo klei zayin ve'mashchizin lahem es hazayin. We're not allowed to sell to them, to Ovdei Kechavim, zayin, weapons. Klei zayin is things that support weapons. And we're not allowed to sharpen their weapons as well. And then the Gemara continues and goes on to say, just like you're not allowed to sell this to Eved Kechavim, so too you're not allowed to sell it to a Jew who's listed. The Gemara asks, what's the case? If you're talking about someone who we're mamish afraid who's going to kill because he's like involved he's the mafia and murder, so obviously, what do you need to tell me that? And if you're going to tell me that it's someone who doesn't kill, so then why can't you sell it to him? So Gemara says, no, we're talking about a case of a yid who's a ganev. And usually he steals at night, which means there's no confrontation and there's no fighting and he's not a murderer. However, if the owner shows up, then yeah, he's going to pull out his gun and he's going to shoot the owner. And so that type of person, you're not allowed to sell it to. Well, what do we see from here? What we see from here is that the attitude some people have, I could sell weapons pretty much free. The idea we could sell weapons free to anyone is not true. We see that people who are chashid for murder, because in the Talmudic times, hold on. In the Gemara's time, people were Ovdei Kechavim were chashid for murder, which is an amazing thing to have to say about an entire population that all of them are chashid for murder. So therefore, you're not allowed to sell to them. Or a yid who's involved in crime. Okay. Now, is this background checks? No. Background checks is much more aggressive. Background checks is, I don't know, I have no chshad, right? Oved Kechavim is, I see Oved Kechavim, right away chshad. List in Yisrael, I see list in Yisrael, right away chshad. So therefore, I'm not allowed to sell to you. Background checks is a step further. It says, you're a regular guy. I have no chshad on you, but I have a tool and the ability to say, wait a few days until I look into your past to check your criminal record and your mental health and things like that. So, is it mamish what the Gemara has over here? No, it's not. It's more aggressive than what the Gemara has over here. I wouldn't say that this Gemara is mechayev background checks. I don't think so. I don't think it's mechayev. I do think it is fair to say that if you strip down this Gemara to its ethical core, then it leads you pretty close to background checks. And if you have the ability to do background checks without really much of a downside, then I think this Gemara would probably be a strong recommendation in that direction. But again, we shouldn't say that this leads to background checks. I think it's more you have to let loose a little bit of the context of what this Gemara is talking about and say, ultimately, what's the neshama of this Gemara? The neshama of this Gemara is, I can't say, what did I do? I just sold you a weapon. It's his problem. It's someone else's problem. No, it is your responsibility. We're all in it together. There's a concept of lifnei ivra l'sita mikshol. There's a concept of misayeya for an Avera. We're not allowed to be party to an Avera, even in an indirect way. And so therefore it is your responsibility. The Gemara spoke about it as, so therefore if you see a problem, you're not allowed to feed it. If you see a problem, you're not allowed to feed it. I think everyone would agree with that. But I think that really the value that this Gemara is teaching does invite us to say, so one second, so if we have the ability to check whether you're a problematic person, right? So then let's go do that. I have to imagine that amongst the Ovdei Kechavim, there were some who were ethical. You can tell me every single one was chashid for murder. But Chachamim lumped them all together and said, well, too bad. Too many of you are murderers, so the whole group is out. So I don't think anyone wants to do that. So if you don't want to do that, so maybe this makes sense. Maybe Taka makes sense to make to draw from the soul of this Gemara to draw out the value of if possible, doing checks of that resort.
They were killers, or that they hated the Jews?
That they would kill, there's actually a discussion. Some of the Shoinim, when they talk about it, say, and if you're going to give that, they're going to end up killing Jews. When the Rambam, when he talks about it, just talks about killing, nezek l'rabim. He doesn't specify the issue of Jews. Okay, so where does that leave us? I think we can summarize with the following nekudas. The idea of celebrating arms, we opened with, celebrating, building a culture around it, that's out. Hunting is also out. Self-defense is a very, very important teaching in Yiddishkeit, and that can't be taken away from people. People need to have the ability to defend themselves if they need. The law that New York had that said that I need to go in front of an officer and show that I have a special threat against my life, that therefore I should carry a weapon outside, I don't find a legal precedent for that in any of the Jewish sources. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. I didn't find any legal precedent in any of the Jewish sources, but even if you go back and look for the value, I don't really think that you find that type of limitation in any of the sources that we saw. Again, you don't really have so much, but I don't really see that. I'll give you another example that I think is a shtick. The law is, if someone's a felon in most states, he can't own a weapon. Okay? That means someone cheated on their taxes, they can't own a weapon. Okay, so is that right based on this? You lose your right to self-defense because of that. You're chashid because you cheated on your taxes. It's a little bit of a funny thing. So there are some examples where the laws, where the right that someone has for self-defense, has been taken away and it seems to go too far. On the other hand, come to people from the other perspective who want to say we should be allowed to do whatever we want. There's some voices here that disagree with that. Besides the fact that you have Reb Nechemia who's cautioning, which we can't really do much with that because the Gemara and Makkos and there's a debate, can't really do much with that. But the other material, we saw with the dogs, that there is a balancing. There is befedish balancing. You can't just do anything you want in order to secure yourself. You need to ensure that people are safe, that society is safe. And yes, reasonable people are going to disagree. There's going to be fights. Is this okay? Is this not okay? That's fine. You had that with the dogs. You had that amongst the Chachamim with the dogs. Yeah, there's going to be debate of, number one, how dangerous the situation is, and number two, should we allow this, should we not allow this? That's fine. But the starting point has to be that there is an arevus, that there is a responsibility both to myself but also to society, and also the idea that I could sell or give or make, and the consequences should never be mine, but always be passed down the line to somebody else, that we see from the Gemara and Avodah Zarah, that also is not compatible with the value. So, is there something concrete we can walk away with the points I mentioned before? The idea that a felon can't own a gun, that's a mud nazak. The idea that you can't walk out on the street the way New York's law was, that was just changed, Supreme Court ruling, that also is a little bit of a funny thing. But in the other areas, the idea that there should be background checks, I think the Gemara kind of somewhat leads you at least halfway in that direction. But there are many other questions that are unanswered and that are to be debated, and it's fine, and that's okay for reasonable people to debate. I don't think that in Halachah you're going to have a clear-cut answer for many of these cases. All right.